So I'm going to turn it over actually to Tay Moss because this is Tay's workshop, and I'm just so grateful, Tay. You've been a remote tech with us for a number of years, but you've also branched off and you're working with the United Church on many projects. Do you want to just talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, and kind of my background kind of more generally might be
Mm.
helpful too. So I'm an Anglican priest. I've been ordained for about 19 years. And I most recently in the last 2 or 3 years during the pandemic switched to working for the United Church, not as a ministry personnel, but doing, well, I guess it's a sort of ministry, leading a project called ChurchX, which is a big e-learning hub, which I'll talk about kind of at the end. But we have about 4,700 some odd students and about 250 courses that we grew in the course of about a year. So I've been responsible for that project management, building that entire system in the last year and all that stuff. We also work with Lutheran churches and Disciples of Christ and with who else do we have? And the United Church of
National
Christ
Church,
and the
our church
National
too,
Anglican Church
our
is
national
exactly.
church.
So we have multiple partners, but anyway, we'll get into that perhaps later.
Mhm.
Before I was in the priesthood, when I was back in college days, I had friends that played in a band, and they needed somebody to help them with tech setup, right? With like AV, of like, working with microphones and mixers and things like that. And so very soon I got kind of roped into that, and I worked for as a roadie for most of my college career. And so that was my kind of initial core training in how to do live AV stuff. And the lessons that I learned doing that have translated to the live streaming video stuff quite neatly. So I do have a presentation here, which I'll walk through. You can interrupt me if you want me to clarify anything, or if something seems a bit unclear, or anything like that. Please go ahead and do that. So this presentation is called Designing for Resiliency. And the concept here is that I'm going to try to give you some very practical tools, as well as some overarching concepts and themes about how to bring greater reliability to your live streaming. And that would work whether we're talking about live streaming on Zoom, whether you're talking about YouTube, Facebook Live, any of those kinds of systems. This would work. So let's start with some first principles for resiliency. First principles for resiliency: what makes a system robust against failures and problems? There's really at least three kind of basic things I'd say. First is the importance of having redundant and dissimilar components, meaning that you have more than one way to solve the same problem, and you have as few as possible single points of failure. I mean, obviously there will be some things that are outside your control. If the pastor gets up to the lectern, as happened to me one time, and their sermon isn't there because some well-meaning volunteer thought it was last Sunday's sermon and took it and threw it in the trash, like nothing that you do as an AV person is going to fix that probably. However, there's a lot of other things that you can control. So this image right here, which was of course created by AI, you sort of see this church, which is held up by a combination of chains, wires, and ropes, right? And my kind of concept I was trying to get at is that any one of those components would fail and the church would still stay standing. So, what are some good examples of avoiding single points of failure? You might think of like a critical system might be the church's internet connection, right? You need that for live streaming, right? Well, yes and no, right? Because if the church's internet goes down, you might, depending on how good your cellular coverage is in the area, get away with throwing up a really quick LTE or 3G hotspot with a phone. I have live streamed with a phone before. I did an event one time, most recently, I think that I did this probably was in front of City Hall. I was there for a coalition against homelessness, for alleviation of homelessness. And they wanted me to live stream the event. And so I just used a hotspot on somebody's phone to do it, because the internet from City Hall, they do have a public Wi-Fi. It wasn't quite strong enough to reach that spot. So you can definitely like really quickly just throw that up. And as long as you can connect your streaming platform, whatever you're using, such as your laptop, to that hotspot, you can get away with that. Another example is, a lot of churches might have like one critical AV volunteer who knows how to plug everything in what order to turn on the switches and so forth. Well, maybe you need a backup volunteer, right? So if that person comes down sick or they have COVID or something like that, you've got a backup that can come in. A lot of you probably use some kind of a hardware-based encoder for live streaming, like the Blackmagic A10 Mini or something similar to that. Well, maybe you might want to think about also having as a backup some kind of software encoder ready to go, like OBS or something like that. Cameras. What happens if you have one camera and it dies? Right? Well, how about your cell phone, right? Can you use your cell phone to live stream? Depending on the platform, some platforms like YouTube have a little bit more limitations than others, but you can generally speaking get away with live streaming from a phone if you have to. It might be slightly obnoxious to be kind of up like this for an hour, but you could do it, right? Same thing with wireless mics. If a wireless mic goes down, do you have spare batteries? If it's not a battery issue, do you know how to change the frequency? If it's not a frequency issue, do you have a hardwired mic that you can just walk up to the lectern or the altar or something and hand it to the presider so they can continue the worship service and you get a good audio? These are examples of redundant and dissimilar components. Dissimilar in the sense that you're relying on two different types of technology, so you have less vulnerability. Like with the wireless mic system, versus a hardwired mic system, those are dissimilar systems. All right, so that's dissimilar and redundant design. Now, the next item, which I think is super critical and often ignored, is something called the successive approximation model, which basically means that you have to keep improving. Like you have to keep taking what you've learned from one Sunday and apply it to the next. So this is a very simplified version of that in this little diagram, but the basic idea is you have last Sunday, then you have a process of evaluation, then you have next Sunday, and in between there you have a loop of design and development as well. So and that applies to all parts of the operation, not just equipment. I mean, a lot of things that can make your system more reliable have nothing to do with buying more expensive equipment, but rather about making sure that somebody checked that the batteries were charged, making sure that somebody has a checklist of things that need to be done before the service happens, all these different little design things that you can implement for the cost of a piece of paper or less. So it's really important to have that kind of learning community among your live streaming folks, even if you're just by yourself. So successive approximation model. Iterative design is by its nature robust. All right. And then the last thing here on this section is I'd say operator competency. There is this idea of human in the loop in engineering, which means that there's a human being supervising what the process or the system is doing. And that versus automation is the opposite approach. And, I would say that if you're going to have a human being in the loop, they need to be marginally better qualified than a NASA monkey. And what I mean by that is, during the space program, there's a lot of discussion about whether human beings could be relied upon in stressful space conditions to make good decisions. And maybe we'd be better off just with monkeys or with human beings who basically fulfill the monkey role. In other words, maybe they can flick a few switches to like turn on the lights or something or turn up the air conditioning, but that was like it. Everything else would be totally automated. And in fact, that was the Russian approach to the space station, to the space program. Everything was automated. There are very few decisions for an astronaut to make. But the US decided to go with a human in the loop solution, and partly because they wanted to have the ability that the spacecraft could operate autonomously if everything else failed. So essentially, the human being became a kind of fail-safe for the entire system. And we saw that work in Apollo 13, for example. So, the person who's operating these systems needs to know more than just flick this switch, flicks this switch. They probably need to understand something about how the system operates so that they can operate in an effective, resilient way when things go wrong, which of course they will. Okay. So moving on from first principles to some specific applications. Sorry, I have a cold. All right, setup and configuration. KISS, first of all, does anyone know what KISS stands for? You can just unmute and shout it out.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Yes, keep it simple, stupid. Yes. Caveat, when possible. It's not always possible to create simple, elegant designs. Often the trade-off, in fact, is money, right? That it's either money or it's complexity or it's amount of like volunteer power that you need to operate the thing. But there's usually some sort of a trade-off to be created there. But when possible, try to keep it simple. I suppose one good example of that is I would always prefer a hardwired solution over a wireless solution, except when absolutely necessary. And that goes for, you might be thinking of microphones right away. The pastor may well want a microphone that they can actually walk around the sanctuary with. All right, fair enough. Let them have that. But if you have like a podium where it's just sitting there the whole time, does not need to be wireless, right? Like it would be cheaper, much cheaper to have a wired system. You wouldn't have to worry about batteries. You just have a solid XLR cable running between the mixer and that microphone, and you're good to go. Wireless microphones are one of those things that is like, really easy for it to get screwed up and to fail, for a number of reasons. So it's a good example. But another one that I'm surprised that many churches didn't figure out is a wired internet connection is better than a wireless one over Wi-Fi. 99% of the time. I mean, wireless systems have gotten a lot more reliable than they used to be, but just like I wouldn't take that risk if I didn't have to. So I can remember doing live streams where I would run like 100-foot long Ethernet cable, and Ethernet is cheap. Like it's like cents a foot, so you can get a big giant roll of 1,000 feet of that stuff from Home Depot or whatever, and then you just have to get a little crimper, and you can make custom cables whatever length you need. I mean, I did work with a couple churches that had challenges running the Ethernet, through their old buildings, but with a little bit of cleverness, you can often figure out how to solve, even those problems. Another sort of some other tips and ideas about setup and configuration. Label everything, right? Even the stuff you don't think needs a label it, stapler, like pen, like it seems like I'm exaggerating, but because what'll happen, is somebody will come in who's not you, who doesn't know like which of these cables goes to which microphone or which thing is which or whatever. So just get a little label maker or borrow one. If your church office doesn't have one, you can just use masking tape and a permanent marker. Like one of the tricks that I always, learned to do just foundationally when I was learning how to do sound engineering for bands was we would take a strip of masking tape and put it along the bottom of the mixer, where the channels are. And then we'd label it with like what was in each of those channels. And it was just a piece of masking tape. So if you change the configuration, we just rip it off and put another one down and then put the new configuration. And because like the church that I'm at, now I love my church, but like I've gone back to their mixer and like it's a mess. Like the things are not what they're labeled to be, right? Nobody has gone through and done the masking trick yet. So label everything, document everything. And I don't just mean like document policies and procedures or store the manuals for things. I mean, also like make some like cheat sheets for yourself, just like one pagers so that you've got information like the password or the username for an account that you might need, or, some other little pieces of information that, you just might need in a hurry and you don't have time to sort of Google through, look through your Google email to sort of see what the password was that somebody emailed you 3 months ago, that kind of thing. All right. Harden your systems. What I mean by that, I have been in many churches where they're still using tripods when they should be using hard-mounted camera mounts. And like you can get a little, basically like an L-shaped bracket that you can, bolt onto the wall and have your camera on it. And then you don't have to worry about anybody kicking the tripod leg, right? Which is not just a hazard to the camera, it's also a hazard to the person who kicked it, who might trip and fall. So get rid of those tripods when you can. It's not always possible, but when you can, like it's time to upgrade, harden it. Zip ties, you got a bundle of wires going into the back of your mixer, zip tie them together, right? So that they're more organized. You don't have to worry about kinks forming. It makes it less of a fire hazard, just things like that. Cable covers, another one. If you're running a cable like over the floor and somebody might step on it, it's pretty important to put something to protect it, both to keep people from tripping over it, but also from damaging it. Like, where was it? It might have been at the cathedral. It was one of our churches. They told me a story of how they had this really beautiful, like 100-foot long, gigantic XLR cable. It was a beautiful cable that probably cost them like $300. And somebody rolled a trolley over it, like a drink trolley, and it broke it, right? And so you can get like from companies like Uline. I don't know if they sell them at Home Depot. They probably do, or Canadian Tire, but you can get sort of things that are designed to go over the top of wires like that create like a little bit of an armored structure to protect them. So make sure that stuff is locked down. Worst case, you can tape it. With taping, it's important. Don't use duct tape. Use actual gaffing tape. Gaffing tape is the black stuff. Well, it comes in many colors, but usually people use black, and you can get different widths. And the thing about it is it's designed not to leave a residue behind. Like, they use it in theater productions and places like that. You can pick it up on Amazon really cheaply. You can pick it up at Vistech here in Toronto. Henry's, like camera stores, will have it. Gaffing tape is useful for many sins. It's just beautiful stuff. And like I said, it doesn't usually leave a residue. It's very easy to tear. It's much easier to work with than duct tape. So you can harden things down. You can use mounts, cable covers, zip ties. So you can harden your system against that kind of like user error of people tripping on things or pulling cables out, stuff like that. Obviously, include backups in your design when you can. For example, many of you will have maybe like an ATEM Mini or some other kind of video capture device, which is taking an HDMI signal from a camera and creating it, changing it over into a digital signal for a USB cable to connect to a computer, right? And we call that encoding sometimes. The ATEM is probably expensive enough that you're not going to have two of those around, but you could buy one of these little guys for like $50 or $30 on Amazon. This is an HDMI encoder to USB. This is just a little video capture card. And these things are dirt cheap. And fun story, like there's a bunch of different brands that make the same exact kind of form factor. It's the exact same chips inside. There's like one Chinese company that is making these chips. And so these like, they can't overheat maybe. I mean, they're not the most reliable thing in the world, but they're cheap and they work 99% of the time. So just having one of these, like you can't use all the features of the A10, but you could unplug one of the cameras, plug it into this, plug it into your laptop, and then continue your stream if your A10 died. So this kind of thing is like this nice little backup to have. Another thing that can fail a lot is if you're using those little extender devices that take an HDMI signal and converted it into something that goes over a category 5 or 6 cable and then converts it back again, or SDI, same thing, where it takes a HDMI signal, converts it to an SDI cable, and then reconverts it back to HDMI on the other end. Those kind of converter extender boxes. I've had many of those die, right? Especially the ones that are based on Cat5. So what you do is you just simply get another pair, right? So that if they die, you could replace it. In fact, in that case, I'd recommend you stick to the same brand because often they will be intercompatible and you can just like swap just the receiver or just the transmitter out, right? So get backups when you can, and when you can afford it, get some backup systems in there. Checklists, roles, cross-check. So I think that checklists are extremely handy just to kind of go through like, oh yeah, I did the batteries, I did this is plugged in, this is turned on, just a list. Cross-check and roles, like if you're lucky enough to have more than one person helping you, then to have a designated thing for that person to do. So maybe you're not in charge of the batteries, maybe the acolytes are in charge of the batteries or the chancel guild, great, but then having good cross-check is good. So cross-check just means that you've done something but your buddy's going to make sure that you did it too. And so like during a live stream, I'll be checking, like if the audio, if somebody else is doing audio, I'll be looking over to make sure that they unmuted the channels and stuff, right? Because otherwise it may be a little while before somebody texts you and there's like, hey, there's no audio on the sermon or something, right? So cross-checking is important. And if somebody's cross-checking you, have the grace not, to thank them for it and not be like, bad about it, right? There is a tradition in the aviation world of the assumption that nobody wants to die in an airplane. So if a pilot makes a mistake and another pilot corrects them, there's no bad feelings. There shouldn't be any bad feelings. People make mistakes. So cross-checking, technical scripts. Especially if you're doing a service that you don't usually do, like Monday, Thursday, Easter Vigil, something like that, take the leaflet, get an advanced copy of the leaflet, print it out in 8.5 by 11 or like a larger size than the Pew edition, and then go through it in the margins and write your cues or like other notes to yourself. Like we're going to switch to this other camera. We need to make sure that we mute this or unmute that. Those kinds of little technical hints to yourself. It'll make your life easier because then you can anticipate what's coming and remind yourself, oh yeah, this is when they're going to, like, I've seen so many live streams where it was clear that the people that were doing the AV did not understand the structure of the service. And so they're sort of surprised suddenly when somebody grabs this strange book off the altar and walks down the aisle. Like, what was that about? So you get this like empty altar, for like a minute until the camera kind of catches up to the action. Like that's avoidable. Like you could just make a technical script. Oh, prepare for gospel procession right there. Okay. Communication channels. First of all, your team that's doing AV, even if it's just 2 or 3 people, need a way to communicate with each other, both while worship is happening, if they're doing it simultaneously, but also, and perhaps even more importantly, after it's done. So you need a way to be able to talk to each other about lessons learned, notes to each other. Email is probably okay for this, but especially if it's a small team, but you might consider going to the next level, which might be something like a running document that you have on Google Docs or on Word, where you can just keep a log, if you're lucky enough to be able to have meetings to talk about it, then, always start with positive stuff. What went really well? What could we improve on? And so forth. So communications channels. But it's also important, and this is another thing that I think a lot of our churches do not do well, is for the AV team to be able to communicate with the worship team up at the front. Like I remember a worship service, it was an Easter Vigil service at a large church in Toronto, and the stream didn't start until about 10 minutes into the service. And so a lot of the kind of star acts of the Easter Vigil, like the lighting of the new fire, the blessing of the Paschal candle, weren't on the live stream. And all it would have taken was for somebody for the AV team to hold up their hands and be like, no, wait, until they got the stream going. They problem solved, and then they could have continued with the service. The people that were there, this was during COVID, so there was like a very minimal congregation in person. They would not have minded the delay, right? But there was no kind of expectation that the AV team would tell the worship team anything about how to do their jobs or what was going on. So creating some communication lines is really good. I've heard of some churches where, especially early in the pandemic, they'd like hold up a card, like a green card, so the clergy could see it that indicated that live stream was live. There's lots of solutions like that. It doesn't have to be complicated or expensive, but communication is really important. All right, I'm going to stop at this moment for a second and sort of see if there's any questions about any of that stuff I've talked about so far. Okay, good. All right, we're going to continue. So that was some considerations and some tips for setup and configuration. Next, we're going to get into problem solving actually during events. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of tools here. One is a very basic methodology for problem solving when things go wrong during live worship. And then there's sort of two other sort of general principles here. So the first thing is follow the signal chain. So if you have something going wrong, like say a microphone stopped working, you need to be able to very quickly try to isolate and test the components and figure out where things are going wrong. And generally you want to do that by going from the source of the sound to its final destination in a logical pattern. So just to give you kind of an example, this is just a diagram of a setup at Lansing United Church. So it looks kind of complicated, kind of messy, and therefore it can be kind of overwhelming. But as soon as something starts to go wrong, let's say the pastor gets up at the lectern and nobody can hear him, you got to figure out, okay, what's wrong here? Is it, a microphone issue, right? So, is it a mixer issue? Is it, something else? Well, you want to sort of start by saying, is that person at the podium actually making sound? Right? Are they doing sound? Then is it the microphone? Like if there's another, person up there, can they use their microphone, like pass their wireless microphone off to the head pastor? Can you ask the pastor to move to a different microphone on a different podium and see if that fixes the problem, for example? And so on. Let's say it's not a microphone issue, then you've eliminated that, then it's going to be like a soundboard issue. This happens surprisingly often, especially with complicated soundboards where you have like submixes and like the main mix. So you may have it configured so that you have a main mix, which is going to the amplifiers and you're hearing it in the room, and another mix, which is going to the recorder. You may not realize that you've accidentally muted the auxiliary channel going to the live stream and not the main channel, that kind of problem. So you just have to be very systematic and be like, okay, well, I know sound, like on a soundboard, often you'll see a little light going on the channel that tells you that it's getting signal. So you'll see that little red light's going on and off. So sound is getting from the podium into the microphone, through the wires to the mixer. So why isn't it going from the mixer to your final source? I'm sorry, your final destination, right? Most mixers will have like a solo mode where you can put headphones in and you can listen. So if you're getting like static or some other thing like that, you can actually just isolate that one channel and listen to it on your headset and determine, oh, that's static, right? Like for example, it's a little difficult sometimes to determine whether a wireless microphone that's cutting in and out, is it cutting in and out because there's interference on the frequency, or is it cutting in and out because the wire is loose on the microphone, right? We had that not too long ago. So, being able to listen to it, you might be able to tell actually which one of those things it is just by listening to it. So you always follow the signal chain, go from the beginning to the end, and you'll often be able to find what the problem is pretty quickly. With cameras, like if I had this problem recently, somebody emailed me. So they have one of these fancy PTZ cameras, and it's got an HDMI out, and they've got a repeater, and then they've got it going to an ATEM Mini, right? Pretty common kind of setup. And he can't get a video signal. Like he's not seeing a video signal in the ATEM. So he plugged in a monitor into the ATEM to the program monitor, so you could see that there was no signal coming in. Okay, so what I suggested to him was to take that same monitor, unplug it from the ATEM, go directly to the camera and plug it in. Right now, that's not the kind of thing you're going to do during a live worship service, probably, but in a situation like later, you can just follow that signal chain and you can figure out, diagnose the problem. I told him that dollars to donuts, it was probably the repeater things, because those little repeaters, they're a weak spot in a lot of our systems. All right. So so isolating the chain is important. Next thing, sort of problem solving wise, is stay ahead of the timeline. be thinking about what needs to happen in your live stream before it happens. So if you have, back to the gospel procession example, that the gospel procession is going to happen. One of the things you might check, like during that final hymn, is like, is that person's microphone, like the gospel reader, the deacon or the priest, is their microphone muted or not? Right. And like just looking down, like, first of all, there's a level of you muting it on the soundboard, but then they may have a mute switch on their body pack as well. So if it's, and you can see whether there's a signal coming in, right? The fancier wireless systems, you'll even be able to see just on the wireless receiver, it'll indicate whether that channel is being muted by the body pack or not. So just right there, you can tell. And so if you notice that it's muted on the body pack, you might already be thinking like, geez, I hope that guy remembers to unmute himself. And if not, you got to sort of figure out what you got to do about it. What could you do about it? Well, what if there was a camera that was like close to that person, like in the nave? Like in my church, we've got a camera kind of right in the middle of the nave, kind of right near a pew. And it has audio coming in it. It has microphones. Normally we keep those muted, but in a scenario where the gospeler forgot to turn on their microphone, if you're quick about it and you've been thinking about it ahead of time, you could unmute that audio channel from that camera, right? So you're taking advantage of something that's already there, a feature that's already in your system, and you can just adapt to this new challenge very easily. So staying ahead of the timeline, thinking about what's going to happen next, thinking about what you do if something goes wrong in that scenario. Like okay, how about this one? You're getting ready for worship, for Eucharist, for you're doing the offering and stuff like that, and you're thinking, what if somebody stands in front of my camera? Like your camera's low enough that the tall person can get in front of it. So Abraham Lincoln is visiting your church and he stands in front of this. What are you going to do? Right? Options. If it's on a tripod, you might be able to slip up there real quick and just shift it over like a foot. Or if it's not on a tripod, maybe you ask, sir, would you mind please, Mr. President, could you please move over a foot? You could totally do that. And people won't be offended. They'll just go, oh yeah, they'll move over because they didn't even know they were blocking it. It wasn't intentional. All right. So that's one option. Another option is you might have other coverage. You might have another camera, right, that has a view of the holy table, and you can get it from there, right? So, I mean, staying ahead, thinking like problem solving in your mind. What do I do if kind of scenarios? Know your contingencies. So I mentioned a minute ago that microphone, that camera in the middle of the aisle of the nave had a microphone in it that we never use. Having that kind of knowledge in your head about what are your contingencies, knowing how to set up a Wi-Fi hotspot on your phone, right? And having even tested that capability, knowing how to go direct from a camera to, one of these guys into a laptop to YouTube streaming not using OBS, but just using the browser. If you didn't know you could do that, you can. So what you do is you tell YouTube you want to broadcast using a webcam. It sees this as a webcam. You've got your camera. You're good to go, right? So knowing those contingencies and maybe even practicing a couple of times with them can also help you with problem solving during an event, big time. All right, so the last sort of section I want to talk about, and then we'll kind of open it up here a bit and have some fun with it, is failure analysis and iteration. Always fail forward. Be a learning organization, like be an organization that is constantly kind of iterating. This picture is of a Falcon 9 rocket during the early stages of development, blowing up when it hits the ocean. And, if you guys remember this program in its early days, it's only like 4 years ago, but this program, they crashed rocket after rocket after rocket. And tomorrow they're going to be doing their 250th landing, successful landing, if it's successful, of one of these rockets. People didn't think that was possible, that you could propulsively land a rocket. And to do it, they had to fail a lot first before they could succeed. And so that kind of iteration, that kind of like embracing failure is really helpful. I've sometimes led workshops where I've said, I want people's failure resume. So I've said around the room, what is your most spectacular failure in life? And then I've asked, or in ministry, and I've asked people to name it. And it's a great way to diffuse people's kind of sensitivity to messing things up, right? Like you're going to mess up, so you might as well just embrace it and learn from it, right? Okay, so 2 specific techniques that you can use in failure analysis and iteration. One is called the 5 whys. The 5 why technique is to keep asking why a problem happened until you have at least 5 explanations, right? So an example is we couldn't hear the pastor's sermon on Sunday. Okay, why? Because there was no signal, no sound signal coming into the live stream. Why? Because the soundboard wasn't properly configured. Somebody forgot to unmute it. Why? Because they weren't properly trained. They weren't looking for that detail of like unmuting it, muting it. Well, why weren't they trained? Well, because the church isn't putting enough importance to the AV, people. They're not sort of supporting this ministry. They're not sort of encouraging it in the right ways. So that's an example of like 5 whys. There's always like at least sort of 5 whys. Like you can always identify, well, the reason that his transmitter ran out of power was because the battery ran out. The battery ran out because they didn't check it before the service. They didn't check it before the service because nobody had that job, that role. There was no checklist, just nobody was responsible for it. See what I mean? Like you can always find at least 5 explanations for why something goes wrong. So keep asking until you have the 5 whys. Is the 5 why technique. The next one, Ishikawa diagrams. This is more useful if you have systemic problems. Like if you have problem after problem, Sunday after Sunday, then clearly there's more than just missing batteries going on. You probably have some larger systemic or cultural issue that needs to be addressed organizationally. So a better way to try to address that issue is with something called the Ishikawa diagram, also known as a fishbone diagram. So it's a holistic look at a system. So you on the right side, effect, this is what's happened. The live stream failed, okay, or whatever. Okay. And then you work backwards from that to determine all the different potential, not necessarily the proximate or most important causes, but what were the things that contributed to this effect? And they could be many things. It could be the natural environment. It could be materials. It could be, that the church decided to buy cheap wireless sets and they're vulnerable to interference. And then that Sunday, they got radio interference because of the environment. You can kind of go on and on and on. If you do this exercise of creating an Ishikawa diagram around your systemic problems, then you can identify all kinds of different things that could be improved. Some of them can be quite simple. I mean, I know a church where, it took me a bunch of times of asking this because I didn't want to be too hard about it, but it seemed to me like the problem was that they had the wrong frequency for the microphones. And I checked and I said to the guy, I said, again, I don't want to overstep. I said, I'm just curious, are you transmitting on bank 1, channel 1? And he checked. He's like, yeah. Like, yeah, that's the default for the factory. Like you might want to try some of the frequencies. And he's like, oh yeah. And he didn't do it. Right. And then the next Sunday, I was like, okay, so how I do it is I keep the transmitter off initially. I turn on the receiver and I start going through channels. And at least with like the Sennheiser systems and some of the other ones, it'll actually give you a little meter that'll tell you if there's any radio frequencies on that channel. So you find a clear channel and then you set up the transmitter and you've got a cleaner connection. Right. And it still took like 4 or 5 Sundays before he made that change. But it's an example of like, you can identify these issues. You can fix them without paying any money often. All right. So that's Ishikawa diagrams. Really kind of helpful tool. But the main takeaway that I would say is, you got to be sort of trying for improvement, trying for excellence, trying new things. If you don't want to spend a lot of money, something you can do too is often borrow equipment or rent equipment. So if you want to test something, like maybe we need, a PTZ camera, but we're not sure. You can see if you can borrow one or rent one, set it up, see how that improves things. That could be a really good move. You can also talk to other churches and look at their setups and learn from them. That's very helpful. You can bring in experts and consultants and stuff like that. There's a couple of problems with that though. Frankly, one problem is that usually the people that set up the system, not the people running the system. Right. So, if you do a homegrown system, you do have the advantage that at least you have the intimacy with it. Like you remember, what piece of equipment went where and kind of how things were set up. Otherwise, you kind of constantly sort of calling that person like, I don't understand why this isn't working. And they got to like fix it. Like I know a church, a United Church, where they have this extremely fancy, extremely nice digital soundboard. But there's no one in the congregation that knows how to run it. So, what they decided to do was to have the sound tech who set it up in a configuration which would work for 95% of their worship services. The problem is that other 5%. And the problem is when they have a wedding or a funeral or like any other kind of unusual liturgy, and they don't even know how to plug in an additional microphone. So that's a bit of a problem. So that's like one of my like warnings about like using outside experts is it can sometimes put you kind of behind on the knowledge gap. The other thing that you can run into sometimes is, there's a difference between kind of like professional broadcast grade equipment and like the kind of stuff that I'm used to using. You need to kind of adjust your expectations with price. I mean, you can spend $10,000 on a camera, or you can spend $100 on a camera. It's like a little webcam. What's the difference? Well, lots of things, like lots of things. Those are going to be very different cameras, but it may be that what you need for one application is actually the webcam, not the really expensive thing. So, whereas when you bring in outside consultants, often they're going to want to sell you the expensive, solution. So you do need to be a little bit cautious about that sometimes. But yeah. So those are some of my kind of broad reaching kind of stuff. Now I want to kind of hear from you guys about some of the situations that you found yourself in where you didn't have resiliency or robustness in your system. What did you do to fix it? Were you successful? That kind of thing. So let's get some war stories.
That was great. You've got a cold, so have a drink of water there, Tay.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Anybody got some questions for Tay or something you'd like to talk about? It was just fabulous.
I ran into this on Sunday. We had a service in the basement, and I was relying on an amplifier to send a signal over to the Zoom session, and it started fuzzing out in the middle of the sermon. So it was like I'm scrambling across, unplugging and plugging stuff in and tweaking it, trying to get it, and I ended up sort of eventually knocking out most of the preacher's volume in his microphone, but solved the buzz. But yeah, it was bad, really bad.
Yeah. Here's a tip. If you're getting a 60 hertz hub, like that hum that you hear sometimes out in the wild, that there's a certain frequency that's 60 hertz. And that means that that's the frequency that the AC voltage alternates at. And so that means you're dealing with electrical interference issue from like a house, voltage, like 120 volt AC power outlet issue. How can that be caused? Classic causes, you may have a unshielded signal wire, like a microphone wire, not XLR because that's shielded, but like something like an RCA cable or something like that. It's unshielded, crossing with a power line like an extension cable, right? And that extension cable is creating a 60 hertz alternating electrical field around it. And you just basically put an antenna across it, right? So you can get a 60 hertz source that way. The other classic source of 60 hertz hums is differences in grounding or ungrounded equipment. So the shields, are grounded to ground. So if you have, like, this happened at St. Magdalene's when I was there for a while until we figured it out. We had a system that was at the front of the church and a system at the back of the church. They were on different electrical circuits in the building. They were grounded, they had differential ground. So it was actually creating a 60 hertz hum when these two systems interacted. And the solution for that, by the way, it's another one of these super expensive solutions, was a pair of pliers and taking the XLR cable that connected the two systems and pulling out the ground pin. What that did was it isolated electrically the two systems. So system A had its ground on its circuit, system B had its ground on its circuit, and the two didn't meet anymore. And that fixed our problem. So 60 hertz is something solvable. It's usually electrical interference.
I bet you that was my problem because there was a pile of cables all over the place.
Yeah.
Quick rigging.
Yeah, XLR can help a lot with that. XLR is usually pretty impervious, but sometimes it gets interfered with. You can also sometimes run into an interference issue where even a grounded system can act like a microphone and pick up an electrical signal on the ground shielding that it can then pass on to interfere with wireless mics and things like that. You can fix that with a donut magnet that's basically a low pass filter. I'm sorry getting a little technical, but anyway, you can get a little gadget that's just a magnet that you stick on there, and that will actually prevent that interference from sneaking through the wire.
That's great. Thanks, Tay. Thanks, Jeff, for being the first one. So who's next? Who's got something for Tay? Because he's amazing.
I was looking for the hand button and I couldn't even find it. So I was kind of a little puzzled, like where you can put your hand up,
Yeah.
That was, so anyways, Tay, thank you. I'm Kevin Caricate. So yeah, I was at this other church, Grant AME, and the pastor wanted to stream 3 different streams, and I was telling her there's no way you can do that unless if you have like some kind of restream or something,
Yeah.
because she wanted to stream Zoom and then put Facebook and then put OBS, like YouTube. Like what?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Okay, that is possible. You're right in your instinct that the first solution would be to use something like Restream. With Restream, what that does is you send a video signal to Restream, and then it redistributes it to Facebook, YouTube, whatever. You have to pay some for that service. You have to be able to do the restreaming. And the other trade-off is that you get a little bit more latency. Like it takes another like 15, 20 seconds of latency. But yeah, that is the solution. And it does create a little bit of redundancy actually, because like Facebook has issues with like copyright of music that it'll like flip out about, things like that. So it can be nice to have that kind of resiliency. You can simultaneously stream to multiple destinations from the same computer with two caveats at least. You need enough internet bandwidth up to be able to handle that. Yeah, 3 gigs isn't going to do it. You're going to need more than that. Yeah, the other thing is you're going to need a computer capable of crunching all those numbers.
It was
Right?
a 16 gig, like 16 gigabytes. Like like you couldn't even like it was a streaming
Yeah.
video game one, and it was like still like it was eating the, like even when you opened it, it glitched. Like it
Yeah.
would freeze up, it would do like all kinds of stuff. Like it was like it, and then things would shut down while you're the service going on, and it's like I'm in the circus. I swear, like literally, I swear, I'm like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Like,
So my problem with OBS, I love OBS. I use OBS all the time, but it is not as reliable as like an A10 mini. Like, in terms of just and that's going to be true of most of the kind of dedicated hardware for streaming. It's just going to have a little bit more oomph. Whereas OBS, sometimes it'll glitch. I've had that happen. So, yeah. Right. Yeah, it's that's the difference. Like if you go the software route, and it's also true with some of the other streaming like vMix and things like that, you're relying on that laptop, and you have a whole scaffold of different things, including Windows. God help us, Windows, running, right? You've got like all these different sort of scaffolds, and all that system has to work. Whereas with a hard piece of hardware like an ATEM, you just fundamentally you have kind of more reliability because like you say to the box, you had one job, it's just simpler, right? So if you're interested in robustness, yeah, I would go for that. There's there are some tricks around that, but I mean, some people use a combination. They use both the ATEM and OBS. You can definitely do that too, and then you can create a backup that way. But yeah, it sounds like part of your issue was the computers. You can split the tasks between different computers too. Like sometimes, like you can have, like let's say you've got like you can split the if you're using like say an ATEM to mix your signal, you could split that signal with just a Y splitter basically, and then you could send one feed to one laptop streaming to YouTube and another to another laptop streaming to Facebook, something like that. But again, you still have to have enough bandwidth internet wise to support that.
well, to tell you the truth, what ended up happening is I had to change a church because, you know, um, it was just too glitchy. Like things
Yeah.
were happening. And then, so the church I'm at now is called Holy Trinity. And there's a professional guy there. His name's Brian Provo. This guy knows his stuff. Like the guy's,
Yeah.
I don't know. The guy is just one click button. The guy puts things on like
Yeah.
gadgets that you just turn on. It's
Yeah.
like literally
Right. Yeah, that's
one
cool.
touch,
It sounds like you can learn a
one
lot
touch,
from that guy too.
one
Yeah, I mean,
touch.
there's
The
things
guy's
that you
name.
can pre-configure. Like even in OBS, you can. This is actually one of the advantages that OBS does have over just like using an ATEM Mini, is that you can create scenes and you can have hot buttons that do the different like scenes. So you can have like overlays and things like that. You can pre-configure it. You can even run. There's an app you can download for your phone, and you can even have your OBS running on one computer, and then you can trigger the presets with your phone. So you could theoretically be like leading worship and like saying, I'm going to the pulpit now, and like click the button and have it switch over. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. I have done that, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it if you're trying to create reliable systems, but it is possible. Yeah. John, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. You can hear me, right?
Yeah.
I found one thing with the ATEM. We got the Extreme Mini Pro. I forget exactly what the model is.
So maybe, yeah.
And you'd recommended that, and actually my video guy who built almost all the stuff out himself on during COVID, because we recorded services before COVID, and then we went to streaming every Sunday. It was very hard to get anything that looked like support from the supplier of the ATEM product. We found Facebook groups. Joined the Facebook groups. So that was frustrating because we had it just getting a signal to, we have a screen that drops down from the ceiling and the overhead projector on there. And so everything looked like it should work. And then it's like, nope, won't stream to that projector. Like, what the is going on? And so then an interim solution was put a Mac back in between that and the projector. And like, so that's really frustrating, but it looks like the Facebook groups are your best hope. Is that right?
Yeah, Facebook groups are great. I mean, any kind of like thing like that. Yeah, no, Black Magic is not known for their customer support particularly. Yeah, I wouldn't, hold my breath there.
Mike, I was really upset with them.
Yeah. But also, if you bought it in town from like either Vistec or Henry's, the guys that work behind the counter often have side gigs doing live streaming and things like that. So you can always ask those guys too. They often actually have the answers. Yeah, I mean, I didn't get into it. Like, there's something called integration hell. It's a technical term from engineering, which is what happens when you have a lot of complex systems and you integrate them for the first time, and then like nothing works, and you have a really hard time figuring out what is the problem because it's all not working, right? The opposite of integration hell is you start off something very simple and you just kind of like build on. So you start with like, can I get one camera, working on this ATEM? Can I get the ATEM working with the computer? And you just kind of like
the ATEM is like, okay, so we can get rid of a couple of computers here. This is going to be great. And then it's like, oh, it says it's supposed to do this. So that was frustrating.
Yeah.
Another one that's kind of more about the people. We've got a lectern. We've got a mic.
Yep.
And some people insist on grabbing that mic, and you get this big crunch noise every single time. So we ended up put I don't know what the right name for it is, but there's a black sort of fabric circle that it's not a
dead cat
field, but it stops plosives and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So largely that's up there so that these people can't grab the mic because this thing is in the way. It ends up in the shots when anybody's at the lectern, but like some things, like even if they kick the lectern, you get a big thump and whatnot. It's just, well, what do you want us to do about it? There's not really a way to isolate the stuff more, is there? I mean, there's a little bit of.
Yeah. So, one thing you could do is you could put a compressor gate limiter on that one channel. And what that would do is it would prevent the maximum volume from going above a certain point, so that even if they did pound on the microphone, you would hear something, but it'd only be as loud as the maximum kind of volume of the voice that you would expect to come out of there. So you can get one of those. You can get a hardware version of it that you just put in your stack of components in your audio system. Fancier soundboards, digital soundboards, would have that built in that you just have to configure on a per channel basis to make that work. But we could get into a much more technical conversation about how to configure one of those, but that's their purpose, is they sort of minimize they set a limit for the volume coming in. They can be very handy for cleaning up your sound, because if you imagine that, like, if somebody's not speaking in a microphone, the microphone is still picking up a little bit of the background noise of whatever's going on. And with a gate, you can actually set it so that if the volume is below a certain threshold, it cuts it off. Basically, it's automatically muted. So you don't even get that little sort of background noise at all through that one channel. That's called a gate. So you can kind of do that sort of stuff. It is a bit of a diminishing return on the investment, especially if you're big problems, people grabbing a hold of the thing. Maybe you put like double-sided tape on it. So they do that the first time and it gets like sticky thing and like, then they don't do it again, right?
Or a taser or something.
Or a taser, electrify it. There you go.
Something extreme. I'll ask my sound guy about that. He probably has that already done. Will you be able to share afterward where it's economical to build in redundancy like a process system, like you mentioned the one piece that you can plug into a camera and
Yeah.
go, because I mean, look at it and say, well, I think for the most part, my weak spot is I just have Rogers coming in. So if that service goes up, because it has happened before, but that drops out, can't stream. So we can have one where it appears that, so I'm in Pickering, that the internet hub got bounced in Ajax where we connect, and it came up, so I had to come bounce our router when it coming in, so it would reconnect for the stream and come in, because it's just like, okay, I don't have anything from outside, but it lost that connection. Say, well, I don't know how to do anything about that unless you also get Bell or somebody else. But it's like, and you think about even some of the other providers, well, make sure they're on the other backbone.
Yeah.
Because if your redundancy still sends you across cable, it didn't help you infrastructure wise. I mean, so I suppose the other, probably the easiest failover is, you may suggest it, cell phone. Just, go in there and who's got big bandwidth? Okay, let's go.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually streamed my daughter's wedding a number of years ago. It was say, it's amazing what you can do. Feels sketchy, but what do you do when it's the middle of the service?
It can work. Yeah, no, I've live streamed a number of times using just an LTE connection. There's going to be some more sort of options with the rise of Starlink. For example, a lot of churches are going to be able to leverage something like that, and but you're right. I mean, fundamentally, unless you start investing in having more than one internet connection, or something, we switched. We had a lot of reliability problems in the city of Toronto with Rogers at my church. And then we switched to fiber optic Bell. And the key thing there is it was actual fiber optic going into the building. So actual fiber optic, not like it's fiber because it goes to the pole as fiber and then it comes down a wire, that kind of nonsense. And that was rock solid. That was rock solid. And my new work at the Toronto United Church Council, we have fiber optic there too. And I specified that with the boss when we moved into that new location. I'm like, we're going to be running a server for our financial stuff. It's like we got to have fiber optic, and he's like, okay, and and it's been solid. So yeah, some setups you can, if you want to spend more, you can get what's called a bonded network, where you've got your wireless, your wired connection through Bell or Rogers, and then you'd also have an LTE module on the modem. And it'll fail over between the two, and it'll share bandwidth dynamically. And so if you lose one connection, it'll just keep on going, and no one will even notice. But again, you have to pay a little bit extra for that, and you probably don't want to bother.
Where that's right, where you get the internet connection in your building?
No, you'd have your own little modem specifically for this purpose. So yeah, if you look at bonded connection, you can begin to do some research about that.
Because I've got some budget right now, and looking to say, well, probably redundancy. If we want to be more professionals, we build redundancy on the places that are the most difficult to fix on the fly.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Yep.
All right. Thank you. I'll let someone else questions now.
Sure,
Thanks, John.
Okay. I think
Sister
Connie might have been next. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I have two questions. We had a lot of trouble with Rogers, and we tried to switch to Bell fiber optic, and we found out just what you were saying, Tay, that what they meant by fiber was that it would take it out to the street, and then the cable coming in from the street was whatever you call it, but not fiber optic. What do you call the
DSL maybe?
Pardon?
Is it DSL?
I guess, yeah, that's right, exactly. So I don't know when we're going to get it here, but does it cost? We're just starting to renovate our guest house, and we're working with our IT people to see what we need to do to make things more stable there. But I'm also thinking, because we're going to be closed for a year, we're going to be doing a lot of stuff on on Zoom or preferably live stream. So somebody can come into the conference room, we can have a small group there and be able to live stream it. But we don't have a really stable system right at the moment in the chapel or
Right.
nothing at all in the conference room actually. So maybe we need to engage you to come and help us. But what I did want to ask is it terribly expensive to get fiber optic brought directly to your own building if it isn't in the neighborhood yet?
It depends. It really depends. And they have to assess it. I remember Church of the Redeemer was looking at this, and Bell was saying, "Oh, it's going to be $10,000 or something ridiculous like that."
Mm-hmm.
And
That's what we heard. Yeah.
yeah, and Bell's explanation was something about how, they'd have to go through all the cement and stuff because it's the way the city's, under the street it was set up.
Yeah.
But yeah, it might be interesting to investigate some other options. There was a service in Toronto, I don't know if it goes as far north as you guys, that would do basically line of sight RF internet. So it was designed for, like, you'd have an antenna on the outside of your building, and it would be pointing at an antenna in the middle of the
Oh,
city,
okay. Yeah.
and it would do internet over the two. There was that solution, and then it might be interesting to investigate Starlink and see if that's an option for you guys. So yeah, I mean, it's worth talking to. But yeah, I'd push Bell some more about this, like, whether fiber optic shouldn't be that bad. It depends on like where it's coming. Like if it's literally coming across the street, was it Cummer Avenue you guys are on, I think?
Exactly.
Like
Yeah.
if it's running on that street or not, I mean,
And they gave us some story about oh God, we had to switch back. I mean, we got a new contract with Bell, and it didn't work. So then we had to switch back to Rogers. But what Bell told us was that the city actually decides where fiber is going, and they couldn't do anything about it. So unless we wanted to pay to have it individually done, and then at that time it was like 10,000. That was in 2019, I think it was 2020. It was the first year of the pandemic. Yeah. So I was hoping maybe it had come down, but those are good suggestions to follow up. Thank you. And my other question is just a silly practical one, but were you at Synod?
No, I was at the American Academy of Religion and
Oh
Society of Biblical
yeah,
Literature
that's where
conference.
a whole lot of other people were.
Yeah, which was a cool conference, and I'm sorry I missed Synod, but yeah.
Well, I just have to tell you one of the funniest things I've ever seen is that when they were having the Eucharist, this is for those of you who weren't there, at our diocesan synod a weekend ago, they were, I don't know that they were live streaming it. Maybe they were, but anyway, just for all the screens that were up around the room, they had a guy with a camera who ran ahead backwards down the aisle ahead of the procession to be able to capture the actual procession. Yeah. And I thought, if you weren't really young and good at running backwards and turning corners as the procession turned and then up the stairs, how would you do that? There must be some simple technical way to do that to bring. And I watch the Washington Cathedral, the National Cathedral, a lot to watch their Sunday service especially. And I mean, it's so seamless. They 1 minute they have the choir at the back singing the introit, and you see them from way up above, and then the next minute you see the procession going this way, and the next minute it's just incredible. Now I know they've got millions of dollars probably that invested in this, but how does a normal place like a church or a convent like us, how do you do something like that? We actually have seen it happen here. Yes. We've had a guy with a camera who ran ahead of a funeral procession for us twice now. But there must be other ways.
Yes, there is a solution for it, sister. So what you can do is you can get an app for your phone that will transmit the video from your phone over Wi-Fi to OBS. And so then OBS sees it just as another camera source. Now, it's definitely something you want to test before you go live in production with it, because you're running into issues of like how much bandwidth do you have on your Wi-Fi, and how fast is, because the computer now has the task of like taking that Wi-Fi based video signal and converting it and so forth. So you're gonna want to make sure that your computer can handle all the
Yeah.
stuff you're asking it to do and so forth. But that is a possible solution. If you want to spend money on it, you can get a wireless HDMI to HDMI transmitter receiver pair. I think on the low end, I think these days those are about $1,000. So it's a significant investment. But that would be like a wireless audio pack, except it's video. Right. So
Oh,
and you'd have one attached to the camera, and they
yeah.
make them so that you can even go in the hot shoe on the top of the camera. So it just slips onto the camera, HDMI connection, battery powered, and then you can do that too. So yeah, so you might do an experiment and see how well the cell phone works for it.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I didn't get into is there's a technology called NDI, which is becoming more popular, which allows you to send a video signal over Ethernet that you might have already existing in the building, and that can be a really nice, elegant solution sometimes. But there's a church, North Bramalea United Church, that invested heavily in NDI, and so it meant that all their cameras in the entire building were all on the system. And so anywhere they wanted a feed of a camera, like if they wanted a view of the sanctuary in the narthex, then they could just do that, and they could have like just the if they wanted, they could have a separate video stream out from like what was going to the nursery from whatever. But that's a real premium kind of thing to do that. But it's possible. It's possible.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. Was it Kim? Sorry, was it Kevin or Tim? I think next.
Tim, then Kevin. Kevin.
I'll just jump in quick, and loving the discussion tonight, very techie, enjoying it. And two thoughts. One is around fiber. By the way, if you're not following on the chat, there's some discussion happening on the side, which I always love as well. So well done, those of you in the back, whispering away in the chat. I would say that one of the lessons in my experience has been as well, fiber to the church or to your house is only as good as what's in your building, right? So if you think of it as a fire hose of information coming to your church, if it enters that modem and then goes to a copper wire that then finds its way to your church, you're really not that much farther ahead. So just to be aware that as soon as you inject copper, those Cat5 blue cables, you're as limited as the smallest component. If you have a very slow laptop that's pushing the information out, fiber's not going to speed that up. It can't speed. So just a thought that you want to weigh in on, Tay. It's not totally true, but it absolutely affects it. If you've got an entire church of old cable with staples through it, it's going to be slower regardless of what you plug in on the outside. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be something for kind of, if you're doing renovations, are you on voice over IP for your phone system internally already?
Pardon?
Do you use voice over IP for your phone system already?
No, not for most of them. We do have a couple phones that use that technology, that because we don't have the phone wiring from the old building when this building was built. But
yeah. So it's a bit of a, but if you're doing a renovation anyway,
we have some though. Yeah, we have phones
to have an enterprise grade switch with like 24, 36, ports on it, and then run wire to all these different rooms, and then you can very easily set up cameras for like surveillance cameras. You can set up wireless access points, smoke detectors, like all that stuff you can put on that same network. And one of the nice things about these industrial style enterprise level switches is they often come with power over Ethernet, which means that if you're setting up like a wireless access point, you don't have to run separate electricity to it. You can actually send it over the same signal. So like when at Messiah, when we redid our phone system, we actually, versus what we were paying Bell, was it Bell or Rogers, just for the phone part of things, we saved money in the first year, even after we outlaid the money for getting the new switch and running the wire.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's definitely worth investigating if you're going to be doing a renovation anyway. Yeah,
I would definitely. That was my thought. So if you're renovating, we ran fiber, light throughout the path to the church, so that we could keep that. We had a ridiculous distance from where the Bell decided the modem would enter to the other side of basically the block. So that's just something to talk about distance with your installers, because you may benefit from running fiber. As Tay, I agree 100%. We have two high quality switches that convert from fiber back to copper, and that's so much cleaner than where you are. But that's a professional installer issue. The other thing I'll just throw 2 cents in is around the idea of running backwards and using your phone. I've had a lot of success as well with a not expensive gimbal, like a little handheld thing you plug your phone into. The ones that we've used is an Osmo gimbal, OSMO. Very not too expensive and not hard to use. And they basically allow you to, like me, wiggle a little bit and keep things firm. And it looks so much better than someone holding a phone. So you just plug it in and you hold it like a little gun. And if you move, a little jerky, it keeps things smooth, and it's very professional, not expensive. So if you're looking for those kinds of things, I love Osmo. Works great for me anyway.
Thank you. That's really great.
Yeah, they make those little gimbals for smartphones too. So you can do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Hey, what you were just talking about, to have that kind of a connection in every room, is there some place you could send me on the internet to find out more about it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the basic concept, if you're talking to a contractor or something like that, is you're talking about using voice over IP.
Right, I know that. Yeah,
yeah,
but
and you're talking about, you want Cat 6. Like, yeah. So Cat 5 is a little bit older standard. Cat 6 is newer and faster. So you want Cat 6. There is a Cat 7, but you don't need that's overkill. So Cat 6 is probably what you want. Yeah. All right. I think Kevin is next. He's been very patient.
Yes, I just would like to share my my experience. My church was built like 25 years ago in a commercial industrial area. So for last 5 years, I tried to connect with Rogers and Bell, but neither of them would like to put any internet, like high-speed internet for us. So we suffered just using the DSL, like 6 meg per second to do our internet. So I was so frustrated, but last year, finally, we got the Starlink. So it's really a solution for us. And because the price, I think, is reasonable, and like we're doing the streaming and all the like the internet is fine. So I think that is something would like to tell many churches, especially you are in a rural place. So Starlink, actually, I find is quite stable. They have some downtime, but very quickly they up again. So maybe can be a alternative for many churches. If they feel really frustrated with Rogers or Bell.
Mm-hmm.
That's what
Kevin,
I was, yeah.
Kevin, can you tell me what?
I just check with your address, and your address also available for Starlink. But you're looking for fiber, so maybe Bell will be your ultimate solution.
Yeah, I mean, remember redundancy. Like, try more than one method. To figure out what you can find. Yeah. Starlink. So Kevin, what kind of bandwidth are you typically getting from your Starlink connection?
I would say around 120.
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah,
pretty good. Yeah.
Plenty for live streaming. Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah. No, I'm quite intrigued by Starlink, and of course that network keeps getting built up. So the amount of downtime that you're seeing is going to go down and down. Like, yeah.
I think it depends on which area you are. So I is luckily because my place is just in Markham, so that's why the reception is actually quite good.
Interesting.
Okay.
Good. Thank you.
Well, we've been going for an hour and about 10 minutes. So any more questions?
I've been struggling trying to capture higher quality video out of the TTZ and an ATEMS rig that I've got now. We're streaming on Zoom, and I'm recording the sermons and posting the sermons on YouTube. But I'm discovering that I'm getting them at a really low res signal, and I can't figure out why.
That's probably Zoom, though. That's probably Zoom's compression.
Well, yeah, right? So I can't figure out how it's like.
That's a limitation to Zoom. So, my friend, so here's an option for you. What you can do is if instead of like you can do the Zoom thing for like the live Zoom people, right, but at the same time record what you're sending to Zoom, right? And then post that to YouTube.
Yeah, so I was thinking of that, and I was thinking using OBS to do that, and unfortunately OBS does not want to recognize the ATEM as a webcam. So
really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you could probably troubleshoot that. You might need to like update something. You might need to try a different USB port. I mean, it could be any number of things.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, even then, like if so two other possible solutions. One would be you can, depending on the ATEM model you have, some of them have this card slot in the back for a memory card,
Right.
and then you could just record onto that.
Right.
The other option is you could get a separate video recorder, right, and split the HDMI signal, for program out to, one going to the live stream, whatever you're doing there,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
the other going to a recorder. And you might say, well, how do I get a video recorder? Well, you could just use a spare laptop that you've got
Yep.
around,
Yep.
something
Exactly.
like that. Yeah. Yeah. The only problem with this setup I just described is that you are creating more work for yourself, because now you've got to like take this recording and post it to YouTube, and that's a bit of a pain.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, one question might be, are you really using the Zoom functionality of like having people from remote participate in the service through Zoom?
Yeah, actually, we have been.
Okay.
We haven't been
Well,
doing it recently, but we've had priests preach from somebody's living room,
right.
stuff like that. We've had readers from Kenya doing doing readings that we've been broadcast into the church and online
Yeah.
too. So
what's going to make you mad too is that Zoom does provide some higher definition services to enterprise level clients. So if you are a bigger church, if you're a mega church in Texas, you might be able to get a higher quality stream.
Got Kevin and then Greg.
Yeah, I was gonna say to him, Jeff, with your PTZ, are you connected to the internet when you're doing it? You can log into the Google account and just have it remote that way. That's how we do it at the church that I'm at.
yeah, I've
Right?
got a right now I'm running a 2-camera rig. At one point I was running a 3-camera rig, but the Pan Tilton Zoom one is mounted up a little higher, and it's wired in. It's again power over Ethernet, and an SDI output on it, and then a converter back in, and then into the ATEM and back into HDMI. So it's all rigged up. Everything's hardwired that way.
Because if you type in the IP address that comes up on the ATEM when you turn it on at the top of the screen on in Google, and then you enter, and then you just put admit ADMIN, and then again on the second line, and then you're in, and then you can do it remote. That's how we've been doing it at my church. So that's just a suggestion.
Yep.
Greg, I think you're next.
Okay. Two questions. One is we have one person who, or a few people, when they're not in person, who want to connect to Zoom rather than YouTube because Zoom works better with their hearing aids.
Interesting.
Just wondering if there's a better solution than trying to stream it to both YouTube and Zoom.
Well, you can have the Zoom stream then go to YouTube. You can connect those two, and that might be pretty straightforward. And then the people that want to watch on YouTube can do that, and the people that want to watch on Zoom can do that. But as Jeff pointed out, you will take a bit of a hit in the quality, on YouTube for doing that. But you can with another solution. I mean, right now,
throw in a mixer in there.
Oh, you mean try to improve the audio quality? Yeah.
That'd be the best way to do it, right? You
Yeah, you can
gotta
see.
kind of throw some money in there.
Yeah,
Can't just go cheap.
Yeah, I mean, you can sort of look at and try to kind of reverse engineer why is the audio from Zoom better? And it probably has to do with them kind of automating a mixing process where they're kind of muting and unmuting channels kind of dynamically. And you can do that just manually, right? You can start to incorporate things like I mentioned before, like gates and limiters and things like that, and compression. Another approach would be you can get automated mixers and what are called digital signal processors, DSPs. So you can get that kind of technology, but you start going down a road like that, and the returns might be kind of minimal. Right, like in terms of how much improvement of the audio for legibility you're going to get, when it may be that the legibility problem might be something else, like that the microphones aren't being worn properly, Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like you need to kind of assess, what's going on. Is it that, like, for example, like one of the two microphones at my church is really muddy, and I know that what needs to happen is they need to put a freaking equalizer on it. They need to put either a parametric equalizer or a graphic equalizer, and like kind of like play with those levels and get that to a crisper kind of
Mhm.
equalization. So it might be something as simple as that. Um, Now, if you're using an ATEM, you can do that in the ATEM software. Like it's got a number of audio processing options. So you might investigate that a little bit too.
Okay. Well, we're actually using OBS.
With
Uh,
OBS, you have options there too for
okay.
audio processing. Yeah.
Okay. The other question was actually running the live stream remote.
Uh-huh.
So the person running the live stream is not in the same building.
Mhm.
And they're using we're using a remote PC to connect to the PC that's running OBS, and basically that's how we've been running the live stream for the last 3 years.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if we were to replace OBS with ATEM that we'd actually be able to use it remote.
You could figure out how to do it,
Okay.
but you're putting a lot of links in a chain.
Yeah.
Like the way you would do it is with the ATEM, there is a control software that you can run on a PC or a Mac that will interface with and basically give you a virtual interface that gives you all the buttons that are on the ATEM itself. The physical buttons are replicated with digital buttons on the screen. Okay. So you can still remote in, you could access it that way. But one of the things is I don't believe that way. In fact, I'm pretty sure you would not have like a view of like, how with the ATEM, you've got this like screen that has the 4 up and shows you what, each of the cameras is seeing. Like you wouldn't have a way to really do that very conveniently.
What about Team Viewer?
Yeah, but it's the same kind of problem.
That might work, but like, like let's say if I'm linked in with you and you're like, you're at your home and I'm here and then I link in and we're on Team Viewer, and then you can kind of still, you have the power. It's just as much as I do, right? Because it's like,
Yeah, but you'd still see what's on the PC screen, which is not necessarily what's on the ATEM screen.
Yeah, because the ATEM
Let's
screen, the one that's the preview out kind of function, like the multi-view function, that's not a computer. I mean, that's just a feed coming to it, right? So you'd have to capture that video and then send it to this remote location somehow.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you really want to do it remotely, then yeah, then a software-based solution is going to make a lot more sense than a hardware-based solution. Yeah. Just foundationally. There is technology. There's a couple of technologies you might look at and consider. I'm going to have a hard time remembering the names, but they're basically designed for applications where you've got people remotely that have cameras that are basically using something like NDI. They're basically encoding RMTP streams or something similar, and are sending that to the internet to one location where those are then being mixed and then transmitted outward. There are some companies that provide that. But when I looked at it initially, it seemed cost prohibitive. So I'm not sure it'd be really worth it in your application. But then again, the price might have come down, yeah, you could. I thought about trying to hack StreamYard for this too. So StreamYard is it's a platform, web-based platform for creating live streams. And the design is that you'd have kind of like Zoom, you'd have like interviewees who kind of come in and you can kind of mix the video a little bit and then send it as a stream. So I thought, well, what if we just had multiple laptops, each set up with a camera, and then somebody remotely could mix those together and produce a stream. The problem is that you do need a fair amount of bandwidth to handle each of those HD connections, right, in the church. Yeah. So yeah, a little hacky. Like all those solutions are a little hacky.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Sure, Greg.
I want to thank you very much, Tay. I want to give you about a few minutes at the end here because I have the team that participated in the Zoom summits here tonight, most of them. Tim Ralph is here from All Saints Whitby. Cynthia Majewski is here as well, and David Parody from St. Margaret's Barry are here. They're the people who, with Rebecca too, Rebecca Jones from Holy Trinity Thornhill, helped us think about what we would do at Shop Talk tonight, and also to analyze what we did at Zoom. Tim and Cynthia made a wonderful sustainability package, which you can find on the Reach Camp page. I'd invite you to visit that when you're planning to go to the next step to hybrid ministry. But one of the things that came out of that Zoom summit was the desire to build a network where, like a Reddit network or something where you guys could talk to each other. And we decided in congregational development that we actually don't have the ability to support that. So we turned to the wonderful Tay Moss, who I would invite you to keep talking, and I'm sorry about your cold, about your ChurchX platform and how you see maybe that fulfilling that desire of the folks that did participate in the Zoom summits over, the winter and spring last year.
Sure, thanks. I'm going to share a screen for this. So are you guys all seeing my screen at this point?
Yeah.
Okay. So I mentioned before that in my job at the Toronto United Church Council, I built a website for education purposes, but also for creating networks and communities of collaboration. And so this is called ChurchX. So you can find it by just going to churchx.ca. And this is just kind of the splash page. And then we have just a bunch of partners that came on board to work with us to create content. So what I've created for this project is something called the Hybrid Worship Network. And the idea is that this would be a common platform for us to share ideas and the Zoom link for these sessions and all kinds of stuff. So this is what it looks like, and I'll share the link in a minute that we can all join up. So you do need a username and password, but it's free also. But the username and password is important because it means we can track individual users and what they have access to, what they post, and so forth. So there's an announcement section. You could sign up to receive text messages if you want reminders. I do have some resources that we've already created on here. Some overviews of, why hybrid worship, some of the basic stuff, methodology, putting it all together, designing for resiliency, and so forth. There are some videos on here, some training. One of the cool things that I put on here was a wiki. If you click on the wiki, then you get sort of definitions, and just like any other Wikipedia kind of thing, you can go in and then you can edit these. Like you all could go in and edit these and add more terms to be defined and things. So the wikis are kind of cool. What else? So right now I'm offering this for free. I mean, I think eventually, I think new people, as the network expands, might have to pay something like $20 or something like that. But right now I just want to kind of build up a population and so on. And one of the critical things with making a learning community work is just having a critical mass of learners, right? So I want to send the link around and encourage you all to join this and check it out. There are case studies in here, like Manor Road United Church case study. And you can see like we did another diagram of like how their setup works, and then and so on. What else? There was something else in here. There's a forum probably. Oh yeah, there's a discussion forum in here too. So this works like most other discussion forums that you're probably used to using on other websites. You can, but it's also searchable. So if there was something in the discussions that you wanted to search for particularly, like a PTZ optics camera, you could actually search for that and it would find it in here. So I'll encourage you all to join that. I will share the link shortly.
Thanks very much, Tay. Is there any questions about this? Because I think it's exciting. It's a way to connect you guys that already are interested in talking to each other, and not to have me in the middle. You techies can talk techie. Any questions for Tay on this? No.
Can I just say, Elizabeth, thank you to you for the way you've organized all of this. It's just amazing, as well as thanks to Tay. It's been fabulous.
Oh, Connie, I think you're awesome. You went online and looked at Shop Talk 1 and you came back. So I just think you're the best.
I've got there are 4 other people here from SSJD as well. And some of them are long distance. So like Chris Hooker and Brian Dench and Sister Catherine and Susan Murphy. So we're all quite excited about it.
Well, I'm excited to have you here.
Thanks.
John, what about you?
Yeah, I wanted to ask with ChurchX, is it already about the remote services providing that, or does it include other things? Like, for instance, I got like cashless donations they're trying to deal with, and so how should it work? that kind of thing under the ChurchX umbrella, or what's the
Well,
scope of
ChurchX
work?
is huge, you know. So I mean, we've got all kinds of courses and all kinds of things. We have like 250 courses and like 4,700 students. We do have courses on stewardship and related sort of things. You could definitely ask this question in the forum, like how do you take donations online, and see what people are doing. I mean, I bet a lot of people are going to tell you they use Canada Helps, and like how they set that up and how they use that. And I mean, I could walk you through that. I mean, during the pandemic, when I was still director of a church, we got a ton of money from the community around us through Canada Helps, specifically to support our food bank. So we actually led with that. I mean, we actually told the community, because a lot of people were reaching out, how can I help? Because they saw our food bank lines, and we said donate cash because we can use that to buy milk and meat. And so we actually had, within Canada Helps, you can create separate funds, essentially, like different, you know, things. So we defined one specifically for the food bank and then shared that link on Facebook and places like that and got a ton of money. So there's the answer to your question. But yes, we would talk about that if you ask it on the forums.
Right. My particular thing here was cashless donation. So people are at church. So
Yeah,
we got that down and say, well, they want to use a Visa card. I saw the Presbyterian Church has got lots of good stuff up there, and they've got a web page that has it. I emailed to somebody in finance at the diocese and I never heard back. But I wonder if ChurchX might have that kind of thing as well.
Yeah. So I have been investigating this. There is, you've probably seen it if you've been to the cathedral recently. There are these little stations you can set up where you tap it and it'll take a donation. But you have to look at the economics of, like, do the calculation, because they rent that station and they take a cut. So you have to sort of make sure that calculation will work. The other way you could do it is you could set up like a Square. You know, you could just use Square to take credit card donations. It's very easy. Years ago, my church set up a Square thing so that we just had a little reader that we just plug into our phone, and then you could just like scan a credit card or something. So that's another solution. Yeah. But we could investigate more. I mean, you know, this is meant to be, the ChurchX thing is meant to be a lot of it like a peer-led kind of thing. So if you put a question out there, you'll kind of crowdsource it and you'll see kind of what other people come up with as a solution. Okay,
so that might be a topic that if there's not a forum now, there could be a forum that answers that.
Yeah.
Because somebody's got to have done this before me.
They have.
Yeah.
It's so just saying, you know, so this is the great thing. How do we pool that resources and draw on what somebody's already done?
I've been bugging the diocese to get into accepting donation by text message. And, you know, that's a whole infrastructure to do that. But my theory was that if they did it correctly, all the churches in the diocese could benefit from the same account. Like we could have it where, you know, you text like the name of your church or something to a number and you give $5 to that church, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's a project to create that resource.
Yeah, we've all got to, you know, voice our desire for it to
exactly advocate for that.
Into the center, so the center hears it, right? So
yeah, I mean, there's probably some other solutions for what you're talking about, the tap thing. I mean, I'm aware of the one. I did some research on the one that's at the cathedral, but there's probably some other companies in that space. Yeah.
Well, when I get on ChurchX, I might post where the Presbyterians got their site that gives you a lot of really good leads.
It's funny, during my daughter-in-law is a Presbyterian minister. You know, she's married to my Anglican church minister's son, and we were sharing resources back and forth between the Presbyterians and the Anglicans. And now, you know, lockdown's over and we're not cooperating as much anymore. So I love the idea of this forum and working with all that smart over at the United Church as well. So Tay, could you put that into chat? I
did actually. The link, it's in chat.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I'm just not. Oh, I'm looking only at direct messages from one person. That's why. All right. Well, I'm really grateful to have you folks here tonight. I'm gonna. This is being recorded, so we will post it on the website, and you can share and tell people, you know, what you thought about it. But before I say goodnight and ask somebody to close in prayer, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Ralph, who's my Educator Supreme volunteer. So Tim, you take the stage now because you've got an exit ticket to talk to us about.
It wouldn't be one of our tech workshops if we didn't ask you to give your thoughts at the end. And I say that facetiously, but also because we really read through them and they become the workshops we do in the future. So I'm going to put a link in the chat And that link will take you to, I'm not kidding, that's it, 3 questions. One of them is your name. So I just gave you 1/3 of the answers. Well, you need to provide that. But beyond that, what we're looking for is information about how much did you learn tonight? Because that helps us. We want to gauge, is this relevant to you? And also, what kind of questions would you like to discuss in a future forum on Church X? Because that will help, I hope, Tay and the leadership team as we work forward to develop ideas like John's. And what does a framework for donations look like in the digital realm? Some of us are using Square, some are using TipTap, there's all kinds of variety, and they all have different purposes, and they all cost different amounts. And so those kinds of discussions are really helpful. So take a minute to click on that link, and I promise you it's not burdensome, and give us your thoughts. It's really helpful as we go forward. That's it from me, Elizabeth.
Thanks. So we're, ending pretty well, sort of an hour and a half after we started. Shall we close with the grace, because everybody knows it pretty much? And let's do that, and we'll meet again online on Church X, God willing. Grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God,
and
the
the
fellowship
fellowship
of the
of the
Holy
Holy
Spirit,
Spirit be with us all.
and forever. Thank you so much, Tay, and thank you to
Thank you, everyone.
to that tech team from the Zoom summits. You all turned up tonight, and I'm really grateful to see you. And thanks for your help, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. If
My
anybody has
sister
any follow-up
Connie,
questions,
I'm delighted you were here. It's so great.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Great. Thanks.
Bye, Ken and Kevin. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.